Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Eastside People Festival of Trusteeship. This session is behind the scenes, what trustees should know about being a charity CEO. I'm Benaifer, Deputy CEO at Eastside People. I'm just going to run through a bit of housekeeping to start us off. So the session's being recorded. Single session ticket holders will be sent links to their session and tonight or tomorrow. Weekly pass holders will get all of the recordings for the sessions at the end of the week. Please stay muted on the call unless you're asked to unmute, as it helps to make sure everybody can hear clearly who's talking. Closed captions are available, but you'll need to enable these by clicking CC or closed captions on your device. Please feel free to use the chat to ask questions or share experiences and insights. We love hearing from you. We've seen some fantastic comments and sharing of resources in the session so far. Please, though, keep comments respectful, useful, accurate, and remember the session is in the public domain, so don't share anything in the chat which you wouldn't want to be made public. Also, feel free to ignore the chat. It can get very busy and you might want to just focus on the discussion. And that's fine too, because we'll be sending the chat out with the recording, so you can always catch up that way. We will always make sure as well that we read out questions fully if we take them from the chat. If we refer to legalities at all, it will generally be for trustees in England and Wales. Though much of it is transferable, please bear that in mind. Check local regulations. And finally, if you don't have a weekly pass, you can still purchase one, which will give you access to all of the sessions and recordings. Oh yes, and properly, finally, a big thank you to the Institute of Leadership. It's thanks to their headline sponsorship that we can make the festival so accessible, and thanks to all of our other sponsors and partners that you can see on the slide there. I will now hand over to our session chair, Vic. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernice, and hi, everyone. Great to have you here, especially at this time of the day when our daylight is disappearing. Appreciate you all spending your late afternoon with us. Thanks, Penny and Bernice, for inviting me to chair this session as well. Lovely to see some familiar names of people among the attendees and some new names as well. My name's Vic Hancock-Fell. I wear a couple of hats. One of the organisations that I'm involved with is I'm the founder and director of Fair Collective. We had a report out last year about the mental health and well-being of small charity leaders in particular, so I'm especially interested in the content of today's session. We're a matchmaking organisation that matches social purpose organisations and charities with talented freelancers and consultants. And with a separate hat on, I am a small charity devotee, consultant and trainer. I'm going to pass over to our panelists to do a quick introduction for themselves, and then we're going to get straight into our questions. Christine, can I come to you first?
Vic, thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christine. I haven't been a CEO for a few years now, but I have done it 3 times for a couple of small organisations and one bigger one. I've been a trustee since my 20s, and I'm actually perhaps really very passionate about governance and the value that it can bring. I've been a chair as well. Currently, I am on the board of Brent Citizens Advice, my local bureau, and I facilitate for the Centre for Charity Effectiveness, their new Chief Execs programme, and I'm a coach and consultant for them. So I hear from and coach and work with, I don't know, several dozen chief execs a year. Look forward to hearing the questions.
Thank you, Christine. I'm an alumni of the Centre of Charity Effectiveness. I haven't made that connection. I should have. Benaifer, would you like to go next?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. My name's Benaifer Bhandari. I'm the outgoing Chief Exec of Hopscotch Women's Centre and incoming Chief Exec of Board Racial Diversity UK. So it's all very exciting for me right now. I've been a trustee since 2013. I currently chair Voluntary Action Camden. I'm ex-chair of Global Generation, trustee with Camden Community Centres Consortium, and the charity most close to my heart is Nazamat Foundation, where I'm interim treasurer.
Lovely, thank you. And Jane?
Thank you, Vic. I'm Jane Ide. I'm Chief Executive at Akivo, which is the membership body for chief executives of charities, civil society organisations as well, but mostly charities in England and Wales. This is my third chief exec role. I'm a trustee and I'm also the chair of the small but unbelievably brilliant Reach Volunteering. And within the Akivo membership, we have around 1,700 leaders. And I get to spend my day job spending all my time talking with them, connecting with them, supporting them, and hearing all about what the reality is of life as a chief executive. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Brill, thank you. Before I dive into questions, I'd be really curious to understand who we've got in our virtual room. So if you're happy to, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, you can either do a full introduction and tell us the organisation that you're representing, or maybe you could just tell us which hat you're wearing today, whether you're a trustee, whether you're a CEO, or working in an organisation in another way. That would be really interesting for us to see. Thank you. I'll keep an eye on that as those start to come in to the chat. I'm going to start us off then. So I'm going to ask the first question, and then we'll see if anybody is eager to start us off. Why did you get into this work? When I was thinking of the questions to ask to really give trustees a sense of what it means to do this role, I wrote a load and then I came back to this question, which felt really important, is why are you even doing this in the first place? Why did you get into this work? Why are you a charity CEO? Jane, do you want to start?
I'm happy to. I love the way you frame. Why on earth are you doing this work? I won't say I fell into it by accident, but for me, it wasn't a career plan. I wasn't working in the sector. I didn't expect to be doing so. I took a 6-month short-term contract to do some member engagement with a brilliant charity based in Sheffield, another membership organisation called NAVCA. And I discovered as I got there that NAVCA was facing some really challenging times financially. It had been through a lot of changes. And the board had made the decision that it needed to give it one last shot, was the way they put it, and really see if they could turn things around. And I had spent 6 months talking to the members, and I knew that there was a real passion and a real desire and a need for what NAVCA did. And I just kind of had that feeling that I could do something. So I put my hat in the ring. Didn't really know where it was going to go, and 6 weeks later had the conversation with the then chair, who said, "Jane, here's the job. Now go out and find out how we're going to pay your salary." And that was my start, and I loved it. It was incredibly challenging, not least because this was 2017, so we didn't know we had a pandemic on the horizon and all the other challenges. But I don't know. I think once you're in the sector, I would say once you're in the sector, it gets into your blood, and it's just a fantastic place to be, despite everything that goes with it. So we'll come back to that later.
Thanks, Jane. Christine or Benaifer, does that resonate with your own experiences, or have you got a slightly different journey into the sector?
I think, like Jane, I kind of ended up there. It wasn't a master plan. There wasn't something that I thought one day I want to grow up and be a chief executive. Thank goodness, really, because I think it kind of works when you fall into it a bit organically. It's a cause that you're really passionate about. It's something that you feel compelled to lead and to make a difference. And I think the reason why I did it was because I like to think that not necessarily I can make a difference, but the organisation can make a difference. And that I worked for 2 HIV organisations and then a breast cancer charity. And I think they were both causes that I felt very passionately about. I'm old enough to remember HIV being at a time when it was, it was really tough times back in the 90s. So I think I felt sort of compelled, a civil justice thing to join. And I think I loved it because you could make a difference. I love strategy. I like building connections and making partnerships. And I think it does give you a degree of autonomy. And I think once you've had that autonomy, of course, you've got loads of accountabilities and loads of stakeholders, but you are able to, in a sense, really influence the culture of your organisation. How do you want it to work? What matters in that organisation? How do you want to be with each other? How are you going to work together to best effect to make that difference? And I did like strategy and setting direction and thinking about, the ambition for the future. So I think it really, it's a job, that's what attracted me in.
Mm.
And I think lots of that happened in reality. So, yeah.
Yeah, whereas
Lovely,
I
thank
was
you.
born and brought up around social value community stuff, and so my siblings and I are all heavily involved in charitable work of some sort or another, always have been, and that's quite the guiding force. You know, we were raised as socialists, and it was very important that we did that. Our parents modelled it. But I was a trustee first. So I've been a trustee since, as I said, 2013. And I think that's ever so helpful. It really, really is. And the role before this chief exec role was, I was director of a department in an international charity, but it was volunteering. That charity only has volunteers. And so the thing that's really surprised me most is actually there's a funny bias against volunteers and volunteering. So I always make sure that I state it really clearly that, you know, my journey has involved mostly volunteering, because that's how it fitted with my role. And, you know, you can even be a chief exec as a volunteer if that's what floats your boat. But for me, being a chief exec is kind of the perfect role because it fits with my personality and the way my brain works. I'm always looking at the big picture and summarizing. That's what I love to do the most. And so finding the job you love that matches the brain you have, I think is quite a winning solution for me.
That's the goal for sure. And I love that you've talked there about being a trustee first or being a volunteer chief exec. That's been part of my own journey, and I see that a lot with the small charity leaders that I work with. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Okay, if we shadowed you for a day, what do you think would surprise us most about how you spend your time? I'm so eager to hear the answers to this. Christine, do you want to go first?
I think I call it the flitting. So over the course of a day, you might go from, you know, when I was working for a small organization, I might empty the dishwasher, and then I go and have a meeting with a funder, and then I'll talk to somebody about property, and then I'd, you know, think about a board paper, and then I'd write. So actually the kind of the breadth of the role, I think, is probably quite surprising, from the kind of the mundane to the strategic and to that big picture. And I think I certainly hear other chief execs talk about how to balance that, and sometimes getting frustrated not being able to spend as much time on the big picture as they might like to, but getting caught up with the details. So I think there's a lot of flitting, as I call it, and I think that it takes a lot of time to get to know and build relationship with your stakeholders, if you like, the people in your orbit, in your, you know, your world. So whether it's funders and donors, whoever that might be, volunteers, your team, those that you support, you know, other local organizations or whatever it might be. But I think that's very time consuming. I think it's complex, and also that sense that it might not go anywhere, but it's really important to invest the time, and it might come back in 2 years' time and go somewhere. So I think that's something that perhaps might surprise. And we had a trustee who joined the board who worked in finance and some very highfalutin job that I didn't understand, moving money around. But he's one of the things that surprised him coming in, which I know is a question for later, sorry, but it was about the complexity of the stakeholder relationships. He hadn't anticipated that, and he's quite taken aback by that. So I think that might have surprised him, and I think it is, yeah.
I'm nodding vigorously here because you took the words out of my mouth, Christine, because for me it's the same thing, it's the variety. I was just looking back, I was looking at my phone just now to see what I've done today, because I can't even remember what I was doing at 8 o'clock in the morning. And so far today, I have had a meeting with one of my senior team about some stuff that we need to sort out internally. I had a one-to-one with my chair. I've delivered an event for some of our members. I've planned another event. I'm in the middle of writing 3 massive board papers. I'm doing this event now, and I haven't even looked at my emails yet. And I think that's fairly normal, and it's part of the buzz I think you can get. But I think it's the fact that in the middle of all of that, you never know what's going to suddenly come at you out of left field that is big, you know, and it could be a big HR issue, it could be a big risk issue, it could be a big stakeholder issue, it could be something really good, but sadly, because a lot of the time it's not, and you have to just pivot, and you have to spin on a sixpence and still keep everything going
Yeah.
in the right direction, because you then got to get back to the other things that you were doing in that case. And I agree with you, Christine, and I think the smaller the organisation you're in, the more that is the case, because by definition, the fewer people you have to kind of pick up some of those
Yeah.
things and deal with them before they get to you. And I think that's something we see a lot of from our members as well. You know, that they're just constantly spinning. Your head is like that all exactly like that. We're like that all the time.
I hate emails, so I think that you'd be really surprised how much I'm on my emails to stay on top of it. I don't like it as a medium of communication, and I hate it when they pile up. So it's the flitting, but interspersed with emails on whatever device is closest to me, to stop that anxiety around not responding.
I've heard it referred to.
And unblocking toilets, you know, and
Nice.
you know,
The one advantage of leading a virtual team, that's one thing I don't have to do.
you don't have to do, right?
No.
Yeah.
We have the IT issues
Answering
instead.
bizarre questions, that's something that I spend a lot of time doing.
Oh.
Yeah.
I've heard it referred to as that task switching, what you've described when you're going from something that's quite low level, maybe it's administrative
Yeah.
or even physical, and then having to switch your brain into a different gear entirely to start maybe doing some more strategic or complex work. And I see that a lot, like you're saying, Jane, among your members in small charity leaders, where you are all of those different things. Really interesting stuff. By the way, folks, I can see that you're putting your questions in the chat. Thank you so much. They are being gathered and saved for us, and there'll be some time for those questions. We might not be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. Okay. I think we might have covered this one a bit, because I was going to ask what would your trustees be shocked to discover takes up so much of your time, but I think we've touched on that a little bit, unless anybody has got a
yes.
special.
Yeah,
Go on.
I've got one. You know what it is? Looking after the board.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, and I think when I did the job, certainly in a slightly bigger organisation perhaps, but I reckoned it was about 20% of my time was honestly spent on. I was working with the board, preparing papers, preparing for meetings, building relationships, attending meetings, and I had a cracking board. So it did really pay off. But I thought 20%, is that crazy? But actually, some research, and don't ask me to quote where from, but I remember reading something saying 25%. So I thought, okay, but I think maybe boards don't necessarily appreciate quite how much time it takes. Not appreciate, but understand, and that you get the return on your investment, but it takes time.
I want to sort of break that down a bit, because it's exactly what I wanted to say as well. So you're thinking strategically about the board paperwork, then you're chasing your department leads, your SLT, then you're proofreading, then you're writing your own report, you're checking, and I'm checking for errors, and I'm quick generally at stuff. It takes so long, and the bit about it is, I don't know how effective it is. Those of us who, if we did a poll right now, how often do we turn up to board meetings without having read the papers and we're scanning them on the screen? It's really, really common. So all this stuff that you've spent so much precious time doing, actually hardly any of it is really absorbed. So my goal now, especially with my new role, is to really work with the new board on how else do we do this, because as a system, it feels very tight, very patriarchal, very rule bound, and actually how much of it is truly effective.
Now, I'll add my take on this, because I'm very fortunate, I think. Well, I know I'm very fortunate with the board I have now, and actually across all three of my roles, the majority of my trustees have actually been chief executives themselves. So, and certainly that's true for Kiva, because our board is largely made up of members. And so I don't think they would be surprised, but I think other trustees who have not been in that role would be surprised. And I agree with Christine and Benaifer. I think we do spend, or we should spend, and it's a really important thing that we do spend that time investing in looking after our boards. And probably the thing I wish I'd have known a lot sooner is the value that slightly different take on it to what Benaifer is saying. I agree about you can spend too much time on the bureaucracy, on the paperwork and so on. I'm a bit of a governance geek. I quite like it when I've got everything tidy and, you know, I've got cross-referencing in the right place and I know it's going to, but that's because it's so important, I've learned, to go into a board meeting having got the preparation in place. And that includes investing in the relationships with your trustees, spending time talking to them, spending a lot of time listening to them. And not that you ever want to you must never try and preempt a board meeting in terms of a decision being made, but you can rehearse your case, you can rehearse your arguments, you can hear what other trustees that you trust are saying back to you, that, oh, yeah, that doesn't quite make sense. And then when you actually come into that governance space, it's so much more effective. But I sorry, we're going a little bit off track from the original question, but I think that is probably something that a lot of non-charity trustees who've come in from outside the sector or who have not been in that senior level role, probably would be really surprised at. And actually, I think a lot of chief executives, if they've not had the experience of working well with the board, would be surprised to hear as well. And it's something I talk about a lot with our members, about actually invest that time, especially when you're going in new to an organisation, because that's when you've got that window of opportunity.
Yeah, I think I figured out a workaround, and I can't wait to start with board racial diversity and see if we can explore this a bit further. And it was wonderful for Trustee Week. Somebody I heard present, I wish I could remember her name, she mentioned it. So I thought I'd invented this, but I haven't. Is don't submit board reports, do a PowerPoint presentation live. And it kind of levels the playing field for those trustees who would have read the papers beforehand, those who glanced at them and those who haven't seen them. This everyone is seeing for the first time. My job is to present it in a way where it's quickly absorbable, and you know, if coupled with great working groups, it can work so well. So keeping that, the governance bit is super important, but how do we just be flexible around that?
That's really interesting that that's come up, because I think it's one of those things in my own experience that I didn't consider to be like really a part of my job. It was something that I did in the nooks and crannies of everything else that I was doing, but it actually, as you've all described, takes up a really significant proportion of your time. Thank you. Right, let's move on to the next question. I'm putting these questions in the chat just in case anybody likes to see them written down as we're going through. So, when was the last time you thought, I can't tell my board this yet, and why? Benaifer, would you like to start us off on this one?
It was an HR issue, and I wanted to gather the data first because I felt that that's the best way to have a strategic conversation and decision, rather than if I just came in and said, I have a feeling, you know, then it can feel like speculation, it could feel like bias, it can feel like a whole load of other things. So it is the one thing I'm very, very careful about. I make sure I've got at least some baseline data to present to the board with a risk that I can see on the horizon. I wouldn't just turn up and go, yeah, I'm a bit worried about this, because I would have to be on my game to know what's going to come out of my mouth.
So there was a sense of feeling as if you needed to have more information, have more of a plan before you took it to them.
Yeah, because if we reverse it, if somebody, say if we were having a meeting and then somebody said, oh, talk about Penny, that Penny Wilson, a lot, you know, each one of us in our heads would be thinking, but I really love Penny. And so I'm like, oh yeah, she's a bit like that, Penny. So everybody would have a different view. So I think just to base it around facts anchors the topic, and helps with that positive support that the CEO needs.
Thank you. What about you, Jane?
I think there's something here for me about context, because it depends whether you're talking about sharing with the board in a board meeting, or whether you've got other, and I go back to the point I was making earlier about investing in those relationships, and this might sound scarily heavy duty for any trustees, but I hope it's not. I have regular one-to-ones with my chair. That's the first thing, and that's an essential. We also have what we call the officers group, which is the chair, the deputy chair, the treasurer, and me as the chief executive. And we meet, we calendar it, we diarise it roughly once a month just to get the time in the diaries, but we quite often don't use it, so it's there if we need it. And then we have a couple of committee meetings. And so I think there's something about, I completely agree with Benaifer. I think there's that thing about, do not go into a board meeting and try to talk about something that you are not ready to talk about. You've got to be on solid ground. You've got to know, you know, your facts, your figures, your concerns. Even if what you're talking about is, I'm really worried about this, be clear that you know what you know, think about how you're going to go into that and how you're going to present it. But by the same token, I go back to, in those other conversations, I won't have a conversation with my chair about something until I'm sure it's something I need to have a conversation about, because obviously your brain is constantly thinking of things and that would just be irritating for them. But I can have those conversations much sooner because I know I'm testing, and they know that I'm testing something out, and that's about the relationship of trust. And then when I've tested it out, then I can start to prepare. But I think the flip of all of that as well is, and it's something I learned from our previous chair at Akivo, who was brilliant, Rosie Ferguson. I've been really, really lucky with my trustees, and I'm not saying that just because some of them are in the virtual room, although they are. But I was asking the board to think about really quite a big decision. This is about 3 years ago, and I first talked about it to Rosie, and her immediate reaction was, I'm really not convinced, and you certainly can't bring it to the board like that because they won't know what you're talking about. And I thought, oh, I thought it made perfect sense. Went away, thought about it, then went through that whole process that I've just described. So talked again with her, talked with the officers, talked to the committee, each time, each iteration. We got to the point and we came into the board meeting, me and my senior team, and we'd done the presentation, we had it all ready, it was up there, I was on slide 3, and Rosie said, actually, it's all right, Jane, I don't think you need to say anymore. We know where you're going with this, it's absolutely fine. I think we're all agreed, yeah, that's fine. And it was like, what? You know, but it was a brilliant lesson in the more preparation you do, the easier it is then to have those sensible conversations. And boards don't like to have things thrown at them. That's my experience as a trustee as well. So don't ask a board to make a decision on something that they've never heard of before, because they can't do it just like that. So yeah, I think it's very much about that glide path that you're creating to have the conversations you need to have.
Thank you. Christine, is there anything you want to add? Is there anything?
Well, I'm going to go at it from a slightly different angle, because I think you're right. Of course, context is everything. But I think one of the things sometimes to work with your board, so you've got this bunch of people around a table with good brains and really committed to your organisation, all being well. And I think sometimes we come with everything a bit stitched up, not stitched up exactly, but a bit prepared and thought through. And I think there's a space for boards to have a bit of time for that generative thinking, where you might say, right, well, we're not going to discuss, you haven't got to make a decision, but this is coming up. So I don't know, AI or something that's a bit complicated that we don't quite know what to do about, you know, this kind of way society's going. Let's just have a think for half an hour, free style, about what do we think about, and you pose a question. So I think there is a place to come with unformed or not fully formed ideas to a board, actually. And I think that's where boards can really add value to help the chief exec with their thinking. So I guess it's a slightly different take on it. And another way is, I agree, Jen, I think it's really nice to sort of at times potentially think about who you've got on your board and sense check with. So you might at times think, well, actually, such and such is a really good person to think about. I'm going to give them a ring or have a coffee and talk to them about. So you're just using the board. Obviously, you work with your chair, but if you've got a trusting relationship, you should be able to go to other trustees and say, you're really good at this stuff. Can I just ask you about this? Or I'd really welcome your thoughts on. So there's a way of sort of testing out, thinking if you can see something's coming up, or that sense of trying to, I mean, at the moment it's very difficult, isn't it? Anticipate what might be coming over the hill. So I think there's a bit of everything in there, isn't there?
I really like that, Christine. And so on the boards I'm on, as well as at Hopscotch, I don't use the word committees because, again, that's more work. A committee demands a certain type of governance. So just keep them as working groups, and then that's your critical friend. So that when something is brought to the board, I'm not alone as chief exec. I've got my bunch from the working group speaking with me.
Yeah, and we've
Lovely.
got some interesting comments in the chat as well. Got Rachel sharing as a trustee that she prefers that approach that Christine's described about kind of hearing things early, and even if they're not fully formed. So I guess it depends, each organization, each board and
Yeah.
CEO relationship, and
I mean, yes, I 100% agree with what Christine's just said, and I think if we're talking about bad news, if we're talking about a decision, if we're talking about something quite crunchy,
Yes.
then you have to
Yes.
think about how you prepare for it. Absolutely. I mean, we have an away day every year. We always try and build time into the agenda, not least, and I know this as a trustee, if all you do is you turn up as trustee
Yeah.
and you've got, let's approve this, let's sign that off, oh, here's the finances, that's not engaging, and it's not making best use of that group of people who you've recruited and appointed as an organization to draw on their skills and their abilities. So having that space for that free-flowing conversation is really important as well. But I'm going to go back to your original question. I'm wondering how many people around this virtual room are already thinking, gosh, they spend a lot of time thinking about their board, and it's back to that point, isn't it? This is such a big part of the chief exec's role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Catherine just put a question, Vic, about as CEO, how do you get value out of your trustees whilst ensuring they don't interfere in business as usual? And I think that's where this sort of working group concept works really well. So they're involved but not involved, and trustees can have their fill without having to actually step into the operations of the charities. I've seen that work so well across many boards. And almost the bigger you get, the more you have to stay focused on that, so that your trustees can stay engaged at the depth that they want.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see the questions coming in the chat. We're keeping a note of them on our shared document, and we'll absolutely come to those towards the end. Shall we sit with this one for a while since we're on it now? Could you remind me who asked the question so I can find it in the chat?
Christine Davis. No,
okay.
Sorry, Catherine.
Do you want to read it out again for us?
Yeah. As a CEO, how do you get value out of your trustees whilst ensuring they don't interfere in business as usual?
$6 million question.
Is business as usual.
Christine, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I mean, there's always this tension, isn't there, between strategic and operational. Boards are strategic and keep out of the day-to-day, and I think that's broadly true, and I think you should broadly try and do that. And I think, again, boards and trustees add value where they're helping you think big picture, bringing the outside in, looking out there and helping you to do that and to think strategically. However, I think, again, it looks at what the skills around the table are. So I remember we had to move building. Now, I can honestly say that I know nothing about building, moving, leases and premises and all of that palaver. But we had a trustee who absolutely did. So we had a working group and we brought him in, and it was very operational, but for a very time limited period. And he was fantastically helpful. And then he stepped back into his trustee. So I think we perhaps don't want to be too prescriptive around it. I think if you're really going to play to the strengths, and if you're in a small organization, it's kind of a bit all hands on deck anyway, isn't it? And I think of my board that I'm on now, and I wouldn't say that we get operational, but I do think we notice it, and I've noticed that we can slip into it a little. So it is trying to say, just elevate, and sometimes I use the gesture, come up a bit, come up a bit, come up a bit. Are we getting too caught up in very particular detail? And I think one of we as chief execs, it's almost like you can feed if you give loads of information, you're going to get loads of questions. So just being thoughtful about the information that you give in your board papers, and that's going to encourage or support higher level conversations. Otherwise, if you give stuff that gets into the weeds, is the expression, isn't it? Then you're going to get into the weeds. So just be thoughtful about what you give to the board.
Thank you. Yeah, Jane, I was going to come back to you because I was really curious about what you said earlier, and you mentioned trust. And I wonder if you think that plays into this dynamic.
I think it does. And I think trust and clarity and boundaries and having those conversations, and a chair who understands that need for boundaries, because at the end of the day, it's a big part of their role is to help make sure that the board isn't overstepping the mark or is stepping in where they're needed. And I was just reflecting, and this is less from my experience as a chief executive and more from my experience as chair at Reach Volunteering, where small organisation doing amazing things, and we have trustees, and have ever since before I was there, had trustees who have particular skill sets that have been particularly useful, especially around the sort of digital technology space when we've been doing big technology programs. And I think one of the things that I've always tried to do as chair there, and you know, as a board that we've always been really clear about, is you put on one hat and you take off the other. So if you're a trustee and you're acting as a trustee, you're in that trustee role. You may take that hat off and put on a hat that becomes effectively a skilled volunteer, and you're volunteering your time. But it's really helpful, especially for the chief executive, if it's very clear which one you're doing. I think the real difficulties come for chief execs when a trustee thinks that what they're doing is offering their skills because they're needed operationally, but the chief exec doesn't actually know whether they're working with a volunteer who effectively they would be managing, or working with a trustee who has a very different power relationship with them. And that can become really messy. And we do see that at Akiva when we're supporting our members, that issue of some trustees, some chairs getting too operational, too focused in, too detailed. And again, I think it's you know, your point, Christine, about, you know, raise it up. I think as trustees, any trustee has the responsibility to say to their fellow trustees, hang on a minute, wait, you know. And one of the most useful questions I've heard a trustee ask in my role as a chief executive is, excuse me, people, do we actually trust Jane to run this organisation? Because if we do, perhaps we're getting a little bit too much into the weeds here, and that is incredibly valuable. As a chief exec, that's a brilliant thing to hear, because A, it reminds people that they can trust you, and B, it gives you that clarity again about the boundaries.
The boundaries point is so valuable. I'm just conscious of the time, and we've got so many questions to get through, so I'm going to go rapid fire on you now. Let's go for question 5. I'm going to put it in the chat. What are some of the hidden pressures or emotional demands of the role that might not be obvious to trustees? Benaifer, would you like to start us off on this?
Yeah, Hopscotch Women's Centre is a women's organisation, and what I've noticed is women, racism, LGBTQIA+, those kinds of organisations is trauma-informed heavy, as it should be. And it means we have a lot of team members with lived experience. And when they share their load, their stories, it's a privilege to hold that. But it also hurts knowing someone you're seeing every day, you know, is carrying something that they've disclosed to you. So I don't really talk about this very much. I don't think I ever have shared this. It's a lot, but I equally feel privileged to hold it, but it does hurt.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree. I think with working in different organisations over the years, what I've noticed is it kind of the work of the organisation sort of gets in the walls in a way. So whatever the work is that you're doing, it is felt very acutely and over time cumulatively by those that work there. So I agree. I've absolutely observed that. I think it's a lonely role oftentimes, and I really encourage chief execs, and I'm sure you will do the same, Jen, through Akiva, to really have a network, have connections, you know, I call it a professional posse, but really have people out there that you can meet and talk to, because I think it is quite isolated. You're really holding it, the emotion or the work of the everything. It's really, it can be very held, and I think it's really important to have place to take that and to be able to share that with peers, with I don't know, I had a supervisor, with, you know, a coach, whatever, but just to have somewhere to take some of that. I think you're the only person in the organisation that really sees everything, that sees the whole. And I used to wonder what on earth I was doing in the job in a way, but I think you're the one person that sees everything. I think that is also pretty tiring.
I would, as you'd expect, I would 100% agree with that. Akiva only exists because a very small group of charity chief execs got together nearly 40 years ago and said, this is really tough, we need to support each other. And that's the beating heart of what we do. But I think I'd also build on it, and I think especially much more so in the current day and age than perhaps was the case 40 years ago. You're always on. You never ever get to not. I write a weekly newsletter to our members, and if there's anybody here that has seen it, they'll know that a couple of weeks ago I was talking about superpowers, and I want an invisibility scarf. I want to be able to put it on and just vanish. Not because I want to sneak around and snoop on people. I really don't want to do that. I just want sometimes just to know that I'm not visible, because I think as the chief executive, you are always on with your team, however well you get on with them, however close knit you are as a group, and you've done some fantastic working relationships. They're always looking to you to be the leader, to do whatever it is. Your board is always looking to you in terms of the role that they expect you to do. Your stakeholders, your funders, your beneficiaries, your volunteers. If you've got any sort of role where you have to deal with the media or with the general public, and that doesn't matter whether you be the biggest organisation in the country or a tiny one, that may very well be part of what you do. You're always under scrutiny, and particularly in the current climate, that scrutiny is not always positive. A lot of the time it's really not, and we certainly hear from a lot of our members about some very, very challenging stuff that they have to deal with in their inbox, in their social media, in their daily lives, from outside the organisation and sometimes within the organisation. And I think it's just that sense that you just can't switch it off. And I think that adds to that burden that Christine and Benaifer have so articulately explained.
Thank you. I'm going to move us on to another question, and then I'm going to perhaps pick one more from our questions that we have curated, and then I'm going to move on to the questions from the chat, because there are some really interesting ones coming in. Benaifer, just a couple of comments in the chat about your volume on your sound. Is it possible to perhaps lean closer or bring your mic closer to you?
Thank you. Speak up.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question then, what is changing about the CEO role in the charity sector, and what should trustees be thinking about for the future? Christine, would you perhaps like to start us off on this?
Well, I think Jane's touched on it, or some of the things I was thinking of there. I mean, it is the scrutiny. I think feeling very, the world is 24/7, this news cycle, this kind of the social media, this sense of reputation. I think, back in the day, if you were leading a charity, you didn't get the scrutiny, or it's almost like anyone can have a pop now. And I think back in the day, the charities were slightly protected from that. You were seen as doing good work, and that but I think now the gloves are off. And I think that's really tough, potentially. I think the way that society is shifting at the moment, I think, at the CAB, we've had to put cameras in, just that sense of feeling quite vulnerable, actually, and fearful for our staff. And so I think that societal cultural shift at the moment is not great. I think obviously I'm going to say technology. I'll tell you, everything's all about the tech now. But I think actually, as a trusted, cybersecurity, we've had a breach this week, a small breach, but it seems to be. And I suppose what's the biggest thing? It's the money. It's the money. It's diversifying income and trying to think about creative ways of bringing income in.
Thanks, Christine. Jane, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I mean, all of what Christine said, absolutely. But I think what we find interesting, what I find particularly interesting from the work we do at Kiva, over the last 3 years, we've seen a noticeable shift in the number of leaders who are saying, I'm going to leave. I can't do this anymore. It's not sustainable. And we've been worrying about that. And we've been worrying as well about the pipeline of new leaders who are saying, no thanks, I've seen what it looks like. I'm not doing that. But what I'm finding really hopeful and positive, and reminds me that this is always a sector that it'll go through the crisis, but it'll find a way, it'll always find a solution, because that's what we're here for. And what I'm seeing now is a lot more discussion about different ways of doing that leadership role to make it more sustainable. So I've been co-chief exec roles are extremely interesting. They're not without their challenges, but we've had a huge amount of interest in that. Every time we do an event about co-chief exec, we get a lot of people there. They want to know about it, and we're seeing some really good examples of that happening in lots of different ways. I'm hearing about people trialing different working patterns, so maybe the 4-day week, maybe something else in terms of either their own individual working or their organisations. I'm hearing a little bit, not really seen much of it happening yet, but I did meet somebody recently that's experienced it of what I think the Americans call fractional leadership, the co-piloting. So you have somebody not as an interim, not to take your place for alongside you. I think that person we all need, that you kind of pull in, do this thing for me, please, go away again, and then I can get on with the rest of it. I think the other thing as well is that people are having to think differently about what I would call their horizon points. So we all start a job, we all think, oh, I think I'll be here for 5 years, I think I'll be here for 10 years. And I think now, if it was 10 years, it's probably 7. If it's 7 years, it's probably 5. If it was 5 years, it might be 3. And I think the message I would give to any chair and board of trustees is be aware of the fact that your chief exec may not be able to sustain that role for as long as they would have done 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Invest in supporting them. Pay attention to what they're telling you, because they may not feel able to tell you how hard they're finding it. So pay attention to the little signals and do everything you can to support them, but also be prepared to support them to leave well when it's time for them to leave, and be ready for that succession plan, because that's the big thing for any charity, any size. Your leader goes in a way that you're not expecting, and you can have a real problem then in terms of keeping everything afloat.
Love coming in on the reactions for that comment, Jane. Thank you. And really interesting observation about the timings of roles, and that's sort of staying power that feels a bit different these days. Benaifer, have you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just to quickly add to what you said, Jane, about watching your CEO, taking care of her. I think that managing CEO's health and well-being is priority, and increasingly so. I'm really lucky to be part of many different shapes and sizes of CEO networks, and we're struggling. Look after us, make sure we are mentally and physically well, so that we can do the same for the team. The board doesn't need to worry about the team. That's the chief exec's job. But it's your job to make sure that she is okay. And I think that's going to become more and more prevalent in the years to come.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question from the chat now, which I think leads quite nicely on from this. It's a question from Rebecca. It's how is it most effective for a board to broach CEO succession with you as the current leader of the organisation? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
no, go on,
sorry.
No, you go.
I've just got one thought, which is to think about succession in the broader sense. So you might think about, as the top team, the board and the chief exec, you might think about it in that context. It slightly takes the heat out of it being about any individual. You're thinking about those top team roles, succession planning more broadly. And if there are other critical roles in the organisation, you potentially do the same. So if someone really held a very specialist function, it would make sense to be thinking about that.
I was going to say, and I've always loved this. So the chair that recruited me to Kivo, Rosie Ferguson, the first one-to-one she and I had after I'd been appointed, after I'd actually started in the job, we met for lunch. And pretty much the first thing she said to me was, so Jane, when you leave, what I'd like is, and she kind of set out her ambition for where we might be at that point. And I know she'd done the same thing with my predecessor. And I loved that because it just made it normal. It's not a huge emotional thing. It's not a, and obviously given the timing of that, it wasn't, well, are you thinking you're going anytime soon? Sort of conversation. And I think there is something about, and again, it all comes back to the same thing, trust and relationships and openness and having a really adult, mature view of what we're all here to do. I think even if you are the founder of your charity, and that can be a very particularly sensitive area, if you founded something, you presumably want it to survive, you want it to thrive, unless it's got a very specific lifespan. So you have to make it possible for other people to have those conversations, and you have to have those conversations. You have to be willing to have those conversations. And I think there is a very fine balance. And as a leader, I've been laughing quite a lot with my team, not at my team recently, because I've said to them I've been here 3.5 years. you know, I don't intend to start. I love Akiva, but I don't intend to be carried out in a box, and I don't intend to carry on working till I'm 90. You know, there is going to be an end point. And a couple of times people said, but you're not leaving yet. And I'm saying, no, I'm not leaving yet. But you need to be prepared for the fact that I will be gone at some point, and we need to be thinking about that succession planning, because I don't want everything I've done here to suddenly just disappear. And I think there's, you know, it's a two-way street. It's partly the board having those conversations. It's partly the chief exec being willing to have those conversations, but doing it in a way that is not at the moment of crisis. If the first time you have that conversation is when something's gone wrong and you want to know whether they're going to leave or not, that's really not a good place for the charity to be.
When they've handed the notice in.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to try and get us through a few last questions before we hand back over. So I'm going to put another question in the chat, and I'm going to ask you, Benaifer, if you're happy to respond to this one, and maybe we'll just take a question each so that we can get through them. What does the CEO value most in a relationship with their chair? So maybe just from your own perspective, Benaifer, what do you value most?
My one-to-ones, which are really important, and that space where I broached my succession planning before she did. And I know that if I hadn't, she would have, because it's a safe space. And really super quick communication. So, you know, for her and I, it's WhatsApp. When I'm chair and I have another CEO, I use the communication method that suits them. So that's when I've got that crunch point, I need input or advice or a decision, I've got it instantaneously so I can carry on with whatever I'm doing. You know, there's not a roadblock. So finding that medium, and then knowing that she's brilliant at being committed to it.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, one for you, Christine, next, I think. I'm going to put it in the chat for you. So this is a question from Peter. It's about being a new CEO. The question is, what would you say the key tips for a first-time CEO need to know? The founder and chair, no paid staff, but looking at the next plan. So going from trustee to being a CEO. Do you have any top tips that you could share? And I suppose this is also what you described, Benaifer, so it might be helpful for you to come in on this one as well.
I suppose I'm wondering whether Peter's moving from a trustee role into the chief exec role himself, or whether it's the point at which they're looking to recruit a first-time CEO. Absolutely, yeah. Join Akiva, absolutely get that support network set up. You know, at CCE, as I mentioned before, we do a new chief execs program. I know Akiva have other good professional development options. Absolutely get some support lined up. Get some training, if you like, build that network, get some support lined up. There's lots out there, and there's lots of reading to be done, and so forth. And I think, you know, thinking about the board support around that person as well, and help that person transition in, because I mean, it's also difficult if you've been a founder and you're then going to be an employee. That's a kind of tricky transition to navigate. If you're the founder and you're going to be the chair, and then you're hiring a chief exec, I've been in that position as well, and that's a tricky transition to navigate. So there's lots of change that I think needs to be just acknowledged and talked about quite openly, honestly, and the sort of sensitivities around that, and perhaps contract with your working relationship. So if you are a founder and you're hiring someone, really try and contract at the beginning, as Benaifer talked earlier about, you know, how often are we going to meet? What's this going to look like in practice?
Yeah. And Benaifer, I'd be really interested to hear
Peter's not
thoughts.
going to be. No, it's not going to be.
Well, I was going to say, Benaifer, we're a little tight on time, so would you be willing to maybe type a few top tips into the chat as I'm posing this next one? Thank you. Okay, we've got a final one from the chat. I think we might be able to squeeze this one in, and possibly one more after this. We'll see how we get on. Jane, I'm going to pose this one to you. I'm just going to mute your mic for a second, Benaifer, if that's all right. Oh, I don't know if I can actually. Would you mind doing that while you're typing? Thank you. Okay, it's a bit of a long one, Jane, so I'll pop it in the chat. I'll read it out as well. There we go. Do the panelists agree that charity governance and leadership is a shared model with trustees and the chief exec, or SLT? And if yes, then should the board and their skills be a resource to support their executive leadership? I'm getting a firm nod from you, Christine, so I'll take that as a yes. What's your take on this one, Jane?
I think there's a lot to unpack in that question. So I think, clearly a trustee board has the liability, it has the accountability, it has the responsibility. But so much of that is then delegated by the board to the chief executive, and that leadership piece. I think there's a difference between the legal responsibilities and liability that come with governance and the leadership. And I think the leadership is absolutely something for a sort of a shared approach. And going back to, I think, what Christine and Benaifer were just saying about contracting, how you contract between each other in this space. Having those conversations, we work with the Association of Chairs to run a program that supports chairs and chief executives to come together as a pair and work in a group to really think through the way that relationship is going to work. And a big part of that is which one of us is going to be out front, which one of us is going to be behind the scenes, which one of us is going to be leading on this, which one of us is going to be leading on that. And it's different in every relationship. And even, as the chief executive of an organization, where you may outstay 1, 2, maybe 3 chairs, sometimes more, depending on how long you're there and how things go with the chair, it will be different in every chief exec chair relationship you have, even in that one organization. So I think having those conversations again, playing to each other's strengths, because we don't all cover everything. The whole point is, I was talking to somebody only yesterday, and they're in the process of recruiting their new chair. And they said, I really don't want somebody who looks and thinks and acts and works like me. I want somebody who's going to fill those gaps, because what's the point otherwise? There's no point just duplicating. So I think it is very much that shared space. And I think particularly where staff teams are concerned, and beneficiaries and volunteers, if you've got those within your sort of immediate circle, sometimes boards can be really invisible. And that's not healthy either. I don't think they should be in at every team meeting or whatever, but I think just knowing that they're there, knowing that they are part of that picture, part of that ecosystem is really, really helpful, really valuable, really important.
Thank you. We are so close to the end, which has gone very quickly from my side. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed the questions and the answers that you've provided. It's been really interesting from my perspective. I'm sorry if I haven't got to your question. If you asked a question in the chat, be sure to stick around for a few minutes and perhaps those other people in the chat can answer as well. I want to end with a final question, and perhaps you could put your answer in the chat as well as share a single word or a very brief sentence to answer this one. But if you could give one piece of advice to trustees about working with their CEO, what would it be?
Can I start?
Please do, yeah.
Invest in their support, their development. It doesn't have to have a price tag attached to it. It's time, and it's giving them permission or even holding them accountable for taking some time out for themselves to reflect, to think, to learn, to do whatever it is they need to do. Because otherwise they will be spending their day cleaning the toilets, answering the emails, doing everything else, and they won't be able to do the job as sustainably and effectively as you want them to do.
Love that. Benaifer, what about you?
Easy win. Acknowledge at every board meeting the effort that's been put in to convene that space and have it full of resources.
Lovely, thank you. And Christine?
Just really acknowledge and support the big stuff. There's lots of big stuff going on at the moment. Don't shy away from the difficult conversations and decisions. This is really tough operating climate, and you're there to get involved and support, and yes, be the top team together.
Lovely. Well, thank you all so much. I've really enjoyed listening to your answers, and thank you for those of you in the chat who've been contributing and sharing your tips with each other as well. Do have a quick scan of the chat before you leave to see whether there's anything in there that you might like to take away. And thank you very much again for having me here, Penny and Bernice. Back to you.
Thank you, Vic, Christine, Benaifer, Jane. That was really generous and honest conversations. It was brilliant. A reminder that we've got still 3 more sessions till the festival finishes. There's one for aspiring trustees on confident trustee, being a confident trustee at 6 o'clock tonight. And then tomorrow at 12:30, we've got strategy that sticks. And then at 4:30, the wonderfully titled How to Not Be a Prat on a Board. And also to let you know that Eastside People offers governance support, trustee recruitment, and we're also offering advice surgeries on some of the topics that have been covered through the festival: merger and partnership, inclusive recruitment and strategy. Please get in touch if you would like to have a chat. Thank you also to the Institute of Leadership and all of our brilliant sponsors and partners. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.